The anomaly in deep space. The vastness of space was silent. The HFY Dominion had ruled this sector for centuries, their warships patrolling the borders, keeping their empires secure. They were feared across the galaxy. No species dared to challenge them. No enemy had ever stood against their power. But today, something changed. A distress signal had been detected at the edge of their territory, deep in an uncharted system. It wasn't from any known species, and the signal itself was strange, pulsing, unstable, and filled with unknown code. Commander Zalvik, a veteran of countless battles, was assigned to investigate. His fleet of 6 heavily armed warships arrived at the coordinates, expecting to find a wreckage or perhaps a stranded vessel. Instead, they found something impossible. A single, massive ship floated in the darkness of space. It had no markings, no known design, and no life signs detectable from the HFY scanners. The ship was unlike anything they had ever seen. It was dark, its metal surface smooth and without seams. It had no visible weapons, no glowing lights, no exhaust trails, just a monstrous, silent presence. Zalvik's crew worked quickly, scanning the vessel, but the results made no sense. The ship's structure was unreadable. One moment, their systems detected nothing but empty space. The next, it showed energy readings so high they seemed impossible. It was as if the ship was phasing in and out of existence. "Commander, our scanners can't lock onto it," reported one of Zalvik's officers, his voice uneasy. "How is that possible?" Zalvik demanded. The officer hesitated. I don't know, sir. It's like it doesn't exist." Zalvik narrowed his eyes. That was ridiculous. Nothing this massive could simply not exist. He ordered his ships to move closer, forming a defensive formation. They activated their energy shields and charged their weapons. If this was a trap, they would not be caught off guard. Then, without warning, the unknown ship moved. It was slow, deliberate, an ancient predator waking from its slumber. The sheer size of it became more terrifying as it turned toward them, revealing a structure that was too perfect, too precise. It was not built like any other ship in the galaxy. It was something else. For the first time in his career, Zalvik felt a chill run through his veins. He didn't know why, but every instinct told him this was not an enemy they could fight. This was something beyond their understanding. And then the comms crackled to life. A deep, calm voice spoke. "You are in restricted space." Zalvik's blood froze. The voice was human. Zalvik's mind raced as the transmission echoed through the bridge. The deep, measured voice carrying a weight of authority that sent an unexplainable chill through him, a sensation he had not felt in decades of commanding warships at the edge of the galaxy, where entire civilizations had trembled at the mere sight of his fleet. Yet now, in the presence of this silent behemoth, an unknown entity defying all logic, he felt something foreign creeping into his bones. Doubt. The bridge crew, trained and hardened by years of conquest and battles, found themselves frozen in place, staring at the main display where the ship, a vessel so massive and so perfectly symmetrical that it seemed almost unnatural, now faced them directly, as though it had been waiting, calculating, watching their every move long before they had even arrived. And despite all the advanced technology at their disposal, despite the countless sensors, targeting arrays, and high-frequency scans meant to dissect and classify any potential enemy, their systems continued to fail in their most basic function: understanding what this thing even was. "Commander, what are your orders?" The communications officer asked hesitantly, his normally steady voice betraying the unease spreading through the bridge like a silent storm, an unspoken fear that none dared to acknowledge, but all undoubtedly felt deep in their core, as if some primal instinct buried within them for millennia was screaming that this was not just another adversary, not just another species to be conquered, but something far greater, something unknown, something that should not be provoked. Zalvik, gripping the armrest of his command chair with clawed fingers, forced his mind to focus, to suppress the gnawing uncertainty growing within him. And after a brief moment, he straightened his posture, his voice firm as he responded to the transmission, knowing that whatever was about to unfold could alter the balance of power in the galaxy forever. "This is Commander Zalvik of the HFY Dominion," he declared, his words carrying the authority of a warlord, a conqueror, a ruler of countless worlds. But despite his confidence, he could not shake the sensation that he was speaking not as a superior force, not as an unstoppable invader, but as a mere guest at the mercy of something far beyond his comprehension, something that had already decided the outcome of this encounter before he had even uttered a single word. The silence that followed stretched unbearably long, a void of unanswered questions that pressed against the minds of everyone on the bridge. And just as Zalvik opened his mouth to speak again, the voice returned, its tone unchanged, calm yet absolute, carrying the weight of a warning that could not be ignored. "You are in restricted space," the voice repeated, unyielding, unwavering, devoid of anger or aggression, yet somehow more terrifying than any threat Zalvik had ever heard, because it was not a warning born of fear or desperation, not the desperate cry of a weaker species attempting to protect its borders, but a simple statement of fact, one that suggested consequences far beyond anything the HFY had ever faced before. And then, before Zalvik could react, before he could issue a command or formulate a response, the unknown ship did something no warship in the galaxy had ever done. It disappeared. Not in the way a vessel would activate a cloaking device or slip into warp, not in a way that could be detected and countered, but in a manner that defied all reason, all known physics, vanishing so completely from their sensors, from their sight, from the very fabric of reality, that for a brief, horrifying moment, Zalvik questioned if it had ever truly been there at all. Zalvik's mind struggled to comprehend what had just happened. One moment, the colossal warship had been there, looming in the darkness like a silent predator, and in the next, it had simply ceased to exist. No energy signature, no spatial distortions, no gravitational wake. It was as if the universe itself had erased its presence. The bridge of the HFY command vessel remained in stunned silence, each officer frozen in place, their minds unable to rationalize the impossible event that had just unfolded before their very eyes. It was a warship beyond anything known, beyond anything possible, and it had moved, or rather, ceased to be, in a manner that should not exist. Zalvik forced himself to speak, his voice breaking through the oppressive silence. "Run a full spectral scan. I want every possible reading analyzed." He could hear the tension in his own voice, the uncharacteristic edge of uncertainty that was foreign to him. His crew scrambled to obey, but the results that came back only deepened the sense of unease spreading across the bridge. There was nothing. No residual energy, no distortions, no sign that the massive warship had ever been there. "It's gone," one of the sensor officers whispered, as if saying it too loudly would make the nightmare real. "That's impossible," Zalvik growled, though he knew arguing against reality was futile. Ships of that size could not just vanish. Even the most advanced stealth technology left something behind. Electromagnetic disturbances, gravitational inconsistencies, heat traces, but this ship had left behind nothing. Then the lights on the bridge flickered. A deep, resonant hum vibrated through the structure of the command vessel, so low it was felt more than heard. Every screen, every control panel, every system connected to their ship's central network went dark for a single moment, and in that fraction of a second, a new transmission appeared on the main display. "Leave." One word. No threat, no elaboration. Just a command, delivered in the same calm, unwavering tone as before. But this time, it did not come from open space. This time, it came from within their own systems. Zalvik's claws tightened on the armrests of his command throne, his mind racing through possibilities. The HFY Dominion had encountered advanced civilizations before, species with advanced warships, powerful technologies, even forms of cyber warfare that were impressive by most galactic standards. But this was something else entirely. No known empire, no known species in the galaxy had ever demonstrated an ability to breach Dominion systems so effortlessly. His tactical officer turned toward him, his scales slightly pale, his voice struggling to remain steady. "Sir, they've accessed our mainframe. Defensive countermeasures are ineffective. They are everywhere." The meaning of those words hit Zalvik like a hammer. This wasn't just a battle of ships. This was a battle of control, and the enemy had already seized it before the Dominion had even realized the fight had begun. "Override all external connections," Zalvik commanded, but even as he spoke, he saw it was too late. One by one, his bridge crew's terminals flickered and shut down, replaced by a single line of text, glowing faintly against the darkness of the screens. Final warning. A cold realization settled over the crew. This was not a battle they could win, not with firepower, not with strategy, not with brute force. The warship, whatever it was, had already demonstrated its dominance, not through destruction, but through absolute control. It had chosen not to annihilate them. It had chosen mercy. For the first time in his long and decorated military career, Commander Zalvik hesitated. He had led countless conquests, reduced planets to ashes, crushed entire fleets beneath the might of the Dominion. Yet now, for the first time, he faced an opponent whose strength could not be measured in fleet numbers or weapon yields. And for the first time, he questioned whether the Dominion had finally encountered something it was never meant to challenge. The silence on the bridge stretched unbearably, the weight of the message pressing down on every officer like a crushing force. Final warning. The words lingered on the screen, a simple yet undeniable declaration of dominance. The command vessel of the HFY Dominion, a ship built to break empires and subjugate entire civilizations, was now at the mercy of an unseen force that had made its power clear without firing a single shot. Zalvik had been in countless battles, faced enemies who had sworn to resist the Dominion until their dying breath. But none of them, no fleet, no empire, no species, had ever made him feel what he felt now. Powerless. He gritted his teeth, forcing himself to push aside the instinctive fear creeping into his mind. "Re-establish manual control," he barked, his voice sharp, commanding. "Shut down all automated systems and reroute navigation to the auxiliary core. We will not be toyed with." His crew scrambled to obey, but their efforts were met with futility. Every manual override was denied before the command could even be executed. Each attempt to regain control was met with an immediate shutdown, as if the ship itself no longer answered to them, but to something or someone else. One by one, the officers turned to look at him, their expressions tense, their eyes betraying the same unspoken fear he refused to acknowledge. Then, without warning, the darkness of space beyond the viewing panel shifted. Something moved. It was subtle, barely perceptible at first, but Zalvik's predatory gaze caught it instantly. A ripple in the void, a distortion so minuscule it could have been mistaken for an illusion. But it was not. The vast emptiness of space had not changed. Rather, something massive, something beyond their understanding, had been hiding within it. The bridge's sensors, though still compromised, flickered momentarily, feeding garbled data onto the screens. Energy readings spiked erratically, jumping between incomprehensible values, as if the ship's instruments were unable to comprehend the sheer magnitude of what they were detecting. And then it became undeniable. A ship. No, not just a ship. A behemoth, a construct of war unlike anything the galaxy had ever conceived, began to emerge from the void. It had been there all along. Its form was monstrous yet elegant, a fusion of brutal efficiency and unfathomable engineering, its armored plating reflecting nothing, swallowing all light that dared touch its surface. It was not made of materials the Dominion recognized, nor did it bear any of the conventional energy emissions expected from warships of this size. And yet, its presence was suffocating, its very existence, a challenge to everything the Dominion believed about military superiority. The HFY warships prided themselves on their formidable size, their massive cruisers dwarfing the fleets of lesser species, their dreadnoughts casting shadows over planets before turning them to glass. But this thing, this human dreadnought, made even the Dominion's largest warships look insignificant. And then it spoke. You were warned. The voice was different this time. It did not come through their systems, nor did it intrude upon their communications. Instead, it resonated through the very space around them, as if the universe itself was delivering the message. Zalvik felt his throat tighten. He did not know how, but he could feel it. This ship, this entity, was not limited to mere physical existence. It was beyond anything the Dominion had ever accounted for in its conquests. And then, the Dreadnought moved. Not with the sluggish weight of a vessel its size, not with the cumbersome inertia that warships of such mass typically displayed. It moved with unnatural grace, with intent, as if space itself bent to its will. In an instant, it was no longer where it had been, but somewhere else, closer, looming over the command vessel like an executioner preparing to strike. The HFY officers, hardened warriors who had raised entire star systems, flinched. Their weapon systems tried to lock on. They failed. The HFY ships attempted to reposition. They couldn't. And then the Dreadnought's hull shifted, its obsidian-like surface parting in sections, revealing something that should not exist. An abyss of energy, raw and unchained, a power that made even the heart of dying stars seem like flickering embers in comparison. Zalvik had been in war for decades. He had seen the power of planetary bombardments, had witnessed the destruction of entire civilizations reduced to nothing but memory. But he knew this was not destruction. This was erasure. Sir, the communications officer's voice trembled, his claws hovering over the controls as if touching them would somehow alter their fate. Orders. Zalvik's mind raced. Every instinct, every piece of training told him to fight, to resist, to stand as a commander of the Dominion and defy this impossible force. But logic told him the truth. This was not a battle they could win. This was not even a battle. They had already lost. For the first time in his career, he gave the only order that remained. Stand down. The bridge of the HFY command vessel was unnervingly silent, every officer frozen in place, as if even the slightest movement would draw the attention of the monstrous ship looming over them. The massive human dreadnought had made no additional threats, had not fired a single shot, had not even moved aggressively since its initial approach. But that only made it more terrifying. There was a presence to it, an overwhelming certainty that it could destroy them at any moment, that it had chosen not to act yet only because it was waiting to see if they were foolish enough to force its hand. Zalvik's mind was a battlefield of conflicting instincts. His warrior's pride, the same unyielding arrogance that had carried him through decades of victorious conquests, demanded that he retaliate, that he refused to bow before an enemy that had yet to even attack. But the undeniable, crushing logic of the situation told him that resistance was meaningless, that to challenge this thing was to invite the complete and utter annihilation of his fleet. It was not a question of whether they could fight. It was a question of whether the Dreadnought would even notice their resistance before wiping them from existence. He clenched his fists, his claws digging into the palm of his hand as he forced himself to speak, his voice hoarse but firm. Status of our fleet. The officer at the tactical station hesitated before responding, his voice barely more than a whisper. The rest of the Dominion ships have received our last transmission, but there has been no response. I believe they are waiting for our orders, Supreme Commander. Waiting. They were waiting for him to make a decision that could mean the difference between survival and destruction. They were waiting for him to either surrender or drag them into a fight they could not win. They were waiting for a leader, and yet for the first time in his life, Zalvik questioned whether he had any control over what happened next. His mandibles twitched, his breathing slow and measured as he turned his gaze back toward the massive warship outside his viewport. He could still scarcely comprehend its sheer scale, the way it seemed to defy everything he understood about military engineering. The Dominion's own dreadnoughts were vast, terrifying in their own right, but they still operated under the known laws of physics, still obeyed the limitations of reality. This thing, this human construct, did not. It moved as if inertia was an afterthought, as if mass and gravity were mere suggestions rather than immutable laws. Zalvik had always believed, with unwavering certainty, that the Dominion was the single most advanced military force in the galaxy. But as he stood there, as he stared at the silent behemoth outside, he realized something with horrifying clarity. The Dominion had been wrong. Every assumption they had made about human technology, every intelligence report that had labeled humanity as an emerging but still inferior power had been false. This was not the work of a young species still finding its place in the galaxy. This was the work of a force that had already mastered it, a force that had simply chosen to remain hidden until now. And the question that burned in Zalvik's mind, the question that made his blood run cold, was why? Why had they hidden? Why had they waited until this moment to reveal themselves? Why did they allow the Dominion to believe it was the pinnacle of galactic warfare when this dreadnought alone was proof that humanity was operating on an entirely different level? The silence was broken by a sudden, sharp chime from the communications terminal. Every officer tensed. The sound was not from their own systems. It was an incoming transmission. From the human ship. Zalvik inhaled sharply, his heart hammering against his chest as he motioned for the officer to accept the transmission. The main view screen flickered, the static clearing to reveal an image that sent a fresh wave of unease rippling through the command crew. It was a human. A single figure stood before them, clad in an immaculate uniform of deep black, adorned only by the insignia of their fleet, an unfamiliar emblem, a sigil that had never before appeared in any Dominion records. The human's face was calm, unreadable, their expression betraying no emotion as they stared directly at Zalvik. And then they spoke. "You are in violation of restricted space." The voice was smooth, devoid of hostility, yet carrying an undeniable authority that sent a shiver down Zalvik's spine. "You will turn your fleet around immediately." Zalvik felt his throat tighten. The words were not a threat, nor were they a demand. They were a statement, a declaration of what would happen rather than a request for compliance. His pride roared in protest, every fiber of his being resisting the thought of simply turning away. But he was not a fool. He could see the truth, feel it in the weight of the silence that followed. The human had given them a single warning. There would not be a second. He forced himself to meet the human's gaze, his voice steady as he spoke. "And if we refuse?" For the first time, the human's expression changed, just slightly. A shift in their posture, a flicker of something in their eyes. Then, with a voice as calm and cold as the void itself, they answered, "Then you will cease to exist." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. No anger, no bravado, no elaborate speech. Just certainty. And Zalvik knew, with every instinct screaming in his mind, that they meant it. Zalvik stood frozen, his mind struggling to comprehend the sheer weight of the human's words, the finality in their tone, the unshakable certainty that radiated from them like the gravitational pull of a collapsing star, drawing in everything around it, leaving no room for doubt, no space for argument, no chance for negotiation, only an ultimatum, a single unyielding path forward that led either to survival or complete and utter annihilation. The kind of destruction that did not leave remnants or survivors, only the cold and empty silence of the void where once an empire had stood. His officers waited with bated breath, their expressions a mixture of fear, defiance, and confusion, their minds battling the same impossible contradiction that had taken root in Zalvik's own thoughts. How could a species that the Dominion had long dismissed as a minor power, a mere curiosity in the galactic landscape, wield such devastating force, such absolute control over the battlefield, such overwhelming dominance that even their threats felt less like warnings and more like statements of unavoidable, universal truth, as if the mere act of defying them would be akin to defying the laws of physics themselves. The human on the screen had not moved, had not flinched, had not given any indication that they expected anything other than complete compliance, and that in itself was the most terrifying part. There was no aggression in their posture, no fury in their words, no hint of desperation or hesitation, or the usual arrogance that so often accompanied demands of surrender from lesser beings who were bluffing, who needed their threats to be believed in order to hold any power over their adversaries. No, this human did not need Zalvek to believe, did not care whether he accepted the truth or not, because the outcome would remain unchanged regardless of his response, because the moment he chose defiance would be the moment the Dominion's fleet ceased to exist in any meaningful form. The silence stretched on, heavy and suffocating, an invisible force pressing down on everyone in the command center as they stared at Zalvek, waiting for him to make a decision, waiting for him to either save them or doom them, waiting for their leader to choose between a humiliating retreat and a glorious but meaningless death, waiting for an answer that only he could give, though in truth, it had already been given the moment the Dreadnought arrived, the moment its presence rewrote the rules of warfare, the moment it became abundantly clear that they were nothing more than insects standing in the shadow of a colossus. Zalvek exhaled slowly, his pride burning, his soul aching with the bitter realization of what had to be done, his voice barely more than a whisper yet carrying the weight of an empire's surrender as he finally spoke the words that would ensure their survival, words he had never imagined he would ever have to say. Turn the fleet around. The command center remained eerily silent, the weight of Zalvek's words pressing down on every officer, every crew member, every soul present. No one spoke, no one moved, as if the very act of acknowledging his order would make it more real, more undeniable. Yet the silence was not one of mere hesitation. It was the silence of an empire on the edge of ruin, of warriors who had known only conquest now standing face to face with the cold reality of their own defeat. The human officer on the screen remained expressionless, showing neither satisfaction nor mockery, no hint of triumph or condescension, only an unshakable certainty that this was the only logical outcome. There was no gloating, no demand for submission beyond what had already been given. The humans had no need for such things. Their power spoke for itself. Zalvek's second-in-command, a hardened veteran who had fought in countless battles across the stars, finally found his voice, though it trembled slightly as he spoke. "Admiral, are we truly retreating?" The question, though simple, carried with it the weight of the Dominion's entire legacy. To retreat was to admit weakness. To turn away from a battle was to accept inferiority. And yet, to remain was to die. There was no battle to be won here, no glory to be earned, no empire to save if they chose to fight. There was only survival or annihilation. Zalvek's jaw tightened, his pride warring with reason, but he had already made his choice. He had seen the impossible weaponry, the way the human Dreadnought had bent the very fabric of space to its will, the effortless way it had disabled their strongest warships as though they were mere training drones. He had seen the power of a species that had long been ignored, a species that had revealed itself not as a minor player in galactic affairs, but as the unseen force that dictated the future of warfare itself. "We are not retreating," Zalvek said at last, his voice low yet firm. "We are surviving." The crew did not move immediately. They were warriors, after all, bred for battle, trained for victory. To them, an enemy that could not be defeated was an enemy that should not exist. And yet the evidence was undeniable, the truth written across the wreckage of their once mighty fleet. The Dominion had believed itself to be the greatest force in the galaxy. The humans had proven them wrong. Slowly, one by one, the officers turned to their stations, carrying out their admiral's orders with mechanical precision. Engines roared to life, battle formations unraveled, and the once proud fleet began its slow retreat, its wounded warships limping away from the battlefield like predators who had finally encountered something stronger than themselves. The human on the screen said nothing. There was no need. The message had already been delivered, the lesson already taught. As the Dominion fleet turned away, the human dreadnought remained motionless, like an ancient guardian watching over its domain. Unmoved by the vanquished enemy it had so effortlessly broken. Zalvek stared at the screen for a long moment before finally turning away, the weight of this encounter pressing down on him like an unshakable force. He knew the truth now, and he knew that the rest of the galaxy would learn it soon enough. The Dominion had ruled through fear, but now the fear belonged to them. And humanity had only just begun.